your mother is a different mother than most of the other boys. Imagine the age span of 12 children, and then you start to understand the dynamics of all that's going on here. Joseph has shared a dream with his brothers. It's infuriated them. He shared it with his father, but it says his father pondered on those things, kept them in his mind. Now, that's easy to understand because you understand Jacob had some dreams of his own that came to pass, and some dreams that really woke him up. So perhaps he thought, maybe Joseph is not just imagining these things. Nevertheless, his brothers were angry. It tells us in verse 4, 5, 8, and 10 that they just didn't like their brother Joseph. He seemed to be a braggart to them. He seemed to be arrogant to them. And he just wasn't liked by his brothers. Now, his brothers are out tending the sheep. Remember that Joseph is nearly the youngest. And while he's between 17 and 18 years of age, some of the other brothers are quite a bit older. And here we find very clearly that he was Daddy's favorite. Well, he was probably Daddy's favorite because he was born of his favorite wife. Maybe it was because he was so young. But nevertheless, his father loved him, and he gave him a coat or a tunic of multicolors. We've all heard that story. And his brothers liked him even less because of it. Nevertheless, Jacob, now called Israel, decided that he was a little concerned about his wayward boys who were tending the sheep. After all, it wasn't too long ago that they decided to have revenge for what happened to Dinah. So he decides to send his son Joseph to check on the rest of the boys. Probably not the smartest move in the world, since it was pretty clear that they didn't care much for Joseph. And now we come into typology. There are many theologians that believe that Joseph, and remember, 1/4 of the book of Genesis is written around Joseph, that Joseph is a type for Christ. That doesn't mean that he was Christ, doesn't mean that he was exactly like Christ, but there were a lot of similarities to his life, to the life of Christ. And we start with that first similarity with the fact that the Father sent him to his own, and his own received him not. It's quite an interesting parallel, isn't it? You say, well, that's just coincidental. Well, you see all of the other coincidences we find with Joseph's life versus Jesus' life. In any case, he sends Joseph out to find his brothers. They're supposed to be in Shechem, but they've moved on to Dothan. Now, you remember what happened in Shechem. Shechem is where they got revenge for Dinah, and probably the people there still didn't care much for this family. Nevertheless, they moved on to Dothan. And as the brothers see Joseph coming, they're already at the hair up on the back of their neck. They have a plot in verse 18 and 19 to kill Joseph, the dreamer, the one who's so arrogant, the one who says he'll rule over them. Well, we'll just kill him and throw him in a pit and say the beast killed him, and that'll take care of the dreamer, and we'll see where his dreams come. But Reuben, who's the firstborn of Leah, the first of the 12, being a little older and perhaps a little wiser, tries to come up with a compromise that will not cause Joseph to lose his life. He says, let's just throw him in the pit, and perhaps down the road somebody will lift him out and send him home to Daddy. And they initially agreed to that. It seemed to make some sense. But then Reuben, the first time that he has a chance to think about it, doesn't really like the idea of killing anyway. After thinking about it for a bit, there's always one in every crowd, right? one who sees that maybe money can be gained here. And so we have Judah. Judah is the fourth child of Leah. And he says, hey, there's no profit in us killing him. There's no profit in us leaving him in the bottom of a pit. Let's sell him. And because they were on a major trade route going towards Egypt, some Ishmaelites came along, and they decided that they would offer him as a slave. And with some bargaining perhaps, they decide to sell him for 20 pieces or 20 shekels of silver. Today's value, approximately $2,560, the price of a slave in those days. Do you see another parallel with Jesus' life? Trade and betrayed by Judas for just the price of a slave. Yes, as we go through Joseph's life, you might see that there's quite a few similarities to the life of Joseph and the life of Jesus. Sent by his father to his own, who received him not, betrayed and sold for the price of a slave. He was more than an average child. He was something special. Now, Reuben is distraught when he finds that his brother has been sold. And he tells his brothers, what are we going to tell Daddy? What are we going to do to get out of this mess? And so they kill a ram, a goat, and they take the tunic and they stain it up good with the blood of the goat and decide to go back to Daddy and tell him that his favorite son has been devoured by beasts. Well, Israel, or Jacob, is distraught. He goes into days of mourning, and everybody in the family tries to comfort him, but he can't be comforted. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the Ishmaelites have arrived in Egypt, and there they decide to turn over this healthy young man for a profit. And they sell him to Potiphar's house. Now, I think it's important for us always to try to get application out of a particular Bible event. So let's take a look at what we can learn, especially this on the eve of New Year's. The danger of holding grudges, holding anger and bitterness towards someone. The danger of holding anger and bitterness towards someone. Number 2, drifting from God and doing things that we wouldn't do if we were in a close relationship with God. And I thought about that as particularly being New Year's Eve, and the fact that there's a lot of people that tonight will overindulge in alcoholic beverages or drugs. And they will do things that they wouldn't do without the influence of the drugs or alcohol. Do you understand the parallels of the fact that when we drift away from God, that we're willing to do things that we wouldn't do if we were in a good spiritual relationship with God? Well, then the third lesson that we can learn is that the oldest, the wisest son tries compromise. And sometimes compromise isn't the best plan, as it wasn't here. And then we see the materialism of Judah, who wants to sell his brother for a profit. No profit in leaving him in the bottom of a pit. Reuben's lack of conviction of going after the Ishmaelites and getting back his brother, sneaking him out of the pit when his brothers weren't looking, not able to stand his ground when it came back to telling the father the truth. Lack of conviction. Some of you will be making New Year's resolutions, but probably in just a few days you'll break those New Year's resolutions because of lack of conviction that you really need to follow through. Number 6, lies lead to more lies. When you lie about something, it almost always requires additional lies to cover up. And finally, number 7, confession is better than compassion. Let me say that again for you, because I struggled with whether or not I really wanted to say that. Confession is better than compassion. They all wanted to try to console Jacob in the loss of his son, or his perceived loss of a son, rather than confessing to him that he was really sold as a slave. How many times have you used compassion rather than confession? How many times have you found it difficult to tell the truth, but to sympathize with someone? I think there's a lot of lessons for us to learn, and perhaps a lot of New Year's resolutions to make when we think about these 7 applications for today's scripture. I hope you have a much better 2022 than you had in 2021. And I hope that you'll take and have the conviction and the compassion and the conviction to confess when you've done something that's improper, so that your lies don't lead to more lies, and your materialism doesn't lead to problems, and that your holding bitterness and grudges and anger doesn't lead to sin, and that you'll not drift away from God. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.